Hi folks, want to thank you all for coming today. Etain Group's really proud and happy to be here as a sponsor. Feel free to come visit us. We have a table down there in the food area, and be happy to chat with you a little bit more about who we are and what we do. But we are a talent solutions company here in Charlotte, and I'd love to introduce you now to Neel. Neel has been a senior business analyst for over 20 years, working at several different retail, banking, and utility companies in the Charlotte area. She's been instrumental in defining standard templates for BA deliverables at several companies, and she has trained and mentored new BAs, and is a member of the IIBA, but her claim to fame is having past directors call her a damn good analyst. Please put your hands together for Neel.
Thank you. They said that we'd have to sit over here behind the mic and press the button because the clickers weren't working. So I'm excited that we're sponsored by Etain because I have worked for Etain before as a contractor. So that was good. Are we there yet? Determining when the requirements are done. So the BA wrote down the requirements. She wrote down what the business asked for, she or he. So what else is needed? How do you decide when the requirements are done, are complete? Have we crossed the line into paralysis of analysis? And how can you as the project manager help? Today we're going to look at what is a good requirement and what can the PM do about that. We're going to look at what should the requirements cover and what can the PM do about that. We're also going to talk about process flows and what can the PM do about that. And what about use cases and user stories and what can you do about that? And after all of that, then are we done? And what can you do about that? So let's get started. What is a good requirement? How about this one? Update inventory. I think most of us would know that's not a good requirement. You want to use a complete sentence with a formal business language. How about this one? Orders placed will update inventory. What orders? Are we talking about sales? Are we talking about purchase orders? We want to make it smart, and many people have different definitions of what that stands for, but we want to make it specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and testable. How about this one? Customer orders will decrease available inventory of merchandise. Well, that's pretty good. But it doesn't say when. Are we talking about nightly? Are we talking about in real time? A lot of different questions. How about this one? The user will click on the green new order button to start a new order. No. We want to describe the what, not the how. Let's look at some more. The system shall improve processing time.
No.
That's kind of vague. It's not real measurable. It's a lofty goal, but it's not a requirement. How about this one? The Econ POS totals in the pseudo NCR format will pass through the MQ and feed into the DBS until the SAN runs its nightly process to translate it, validate it, create the SAN 7900 report, and update SLR, RTL, and HRS systems.
That's awesome. I actually know what some of that means.
Are you at Belk?
No. I know what MQ is.
Yeah, a lot of people use MQ. All right. Well, besides having too many different requirements in one requirement, we want to use business language, not text speak. How about this one? The user will key the daily sales and receipt totals on the daily form and then transfer them to the weekly GL journal entry form, and then the system will tell her if her debits and credits are in or out of balance.
It's not.
It is a how, but worse than a how, it's taking a manual process and putting it on the screen.
Right.
It's not thinking outside the box or thinking beyond how they do it today. This person, and I actually killed a project where this was happening. It got started, I was brought into it and asked to write test scripts, and so I started to learn what they were doing and realized they had taken the manual process and put it on the screen. And, you know, I mean, why should you be trying to figure out if your debits and credits are in balance? The system shouldn't let them get out of balance. A transaction is a transaction that has a debit and a credit associated with it. So your system should be able to apply that debit and credit and keep it in balance. How about this one? The solution will create weekly GL journal entries from the sales and receipts totals based on predefined rules for each totals category. I think this is a good one. It doesn't have to say yet what each of those rules are. This would be a good requirement. But what can you as the PM do about that? First, read the requirements. Do they clearly explain what you heard in the meetings? I can't tell you how many PMs I've worked under who never read the requirements. They just hope that the BA's getting it done and the business is happy and let's make sure everybody's smiling. Ask questions. If you read a requirement that's not clear, ask a question. Say, what does this mean? And when they explain it to you, then say, okay, is there a way we can reword it so it says what you just told me? Make suggestions on how to clarify the requirement. And when you see a how statement, ask the business analyst to reword it so it's just a what statement. And schedule a walkthrough. The worst thing that can happen is for the BA to take the requirements, get them approved by the business, throw them over the wall, or to the developers, or to email them out to the business and say, please review these and send your comments. Some people won't take the time to read them. Duh. A walkthrough is your best bet. And when I'm doing a walkthrough as a BA, if there's something that someone doesn't understand that I wrote, I consider that my fault. I didn't write it in a way that they could understand it. I need to reword it. I need to clarify it. So, we've talked about what makes a good requirement. What should the requirements cover? Well, the requirements should start with an executive summary. And I would suggest that it's easier to write the executive summary at the end than at the beginning. It should state the business problem, the proposed solution, and a quick bullet list of what's in scope and what's out of scope. Next, we want a stakeholder matrix. It should list who, their names, who they are in their real job. This is where they like to see their titles listed. And why they're here, who they are with regard to this project. If they are the SME, subject matter expert, if they are the project sponsor, or what their purpose is for being here. And then have a RACI chart. RACI is are they responsible, accountable, consulted, or just informed? And fill that in for the areas of interest. Those areas of interest might include strategic direction, business processes. So one person might be, your project sponsor might be accountable for the strategic direction. The rest of us are just informed in the strategic direction. Your business lead might be accountable for the business processes. Another area is rules and controls. Your person who represents the accounting department is very interested in the rules and controls. System usability. Your trainers and your testers are interested in system usability, but your sponsor is also concerned about the system usability because the people need to use it. It needs to be quick and easy. And the output of the system. The accountants are very concerned about the output of the system. The auditors are concerned about the output of the system. So these are just some areas that you might fill in as an area of interest. The stakeholder matrix is very helpful in making sure that we haven't overlooked somebody. And that's why when we include it in the requirements, the people who are approving the requirements are approving that, yes, these are the people that needed to be asked and included. After the stakeholder matrix, we can list the assumptions. And assumptions is anything outside the project's control on which it's dependent. This might be pending legislation. Maybe we are working on a project that was created by the Affordable Care Act. And so we're assuming that it's not going to get repealed because that would kill the whole project. It might be dependency on another project that's in flight. Maybe we're going to be processing website orders, transactions, and we're dependent upon the marketing folks getting the website up first, and creating and our piece is only the transactions themselves. After the assumptions, we get into the business requirements. Now, we talked about what makes a good requirement. Let's talk about the requirements as a group. First, you want the requirements as a group to keep the reader's attention. It may be dry material, but it doesn't have to be mind-numbing. Please don't ever copy and paste sections or say something more than once. Your reader will start to think, haven't I read this once before? And they start to get confused. If you're going to state it over in the non-functional requirements, then just reference it here. If you need to mention it during the requirements, you can reference it somewhere else. The users will be authorized according to the security requirements stated later in this document or whatever. But I can't count the number of times I've seen requirements where somebody copied and pasted a whole section and then just changed a couple of words because in this section, maybe we're talking about credit card processing. And over here we were talking about Visa and MasterCard. And now we're going to talk about Discover. Someone copy everything I said about Visa and MasterCard and then repeat it for Discover and change the word to Discover. There's no point in that. Let's write about what's different about Discover card or whatever it is. Don't jump between topics. Put like topics together with detailed requirements as subordinate items under high-level requirements. This makes it so much easier for your reader to follow your train of thought and for us to keep all the like items together. Especially when we're turning it over to the development team to have all the like items together. Do address the failure scenarios, like canceling an order, or if you're offline, if you're in a store and you're processing a transaction in a cash register and you're offline to authorizations. You have to talk about, you need to address the requirements need to address the scenarios where what we want to do fails, or the customer's credit is declined, then what do we do? But don't dwell in the minutia. That's again getting into the how or the tiny little things. You can get to the minutia when you get to your use cases or your user stories or your acceptance criteria of your user stories. Okay, so we've talked about the business requirements. You could add functional requirements after that. But let me ask you, what's the difference between business requirements and functional requirements? I would say, what difference does it make? If I define something as a business requirement versus a functional requirement, what difference is it going to make to the outcome of my project, whether this is a business requirement or a functional requirement? My feeling is that, no, it's not going to make any difference. Teams waste a lot of time arguing over this distinction, and it really doesn't matter. So don't include a category called functional requirements. You make your life a little easier.
So is that kind of just refining? I guess I'm looking at functional requirements, kind of a system requirement where we have a business requirement to display.
I think of the
X, and it just-
system requirements as more of a non-functional, and we'll get into the non-functionals in a minute. I think of functional requirements as maybe a little lower level than the business requirement, but
Kind of refining it? Or?
yeah, they tend to be refining it, but usually the information's coming from the business, and so then you start to get into this question, well, if it came from the business, is it a business requirement or is it a functional requirement? If we don't even have to classify them, we save ourselves a lot of time.
Right. It's a requirement.
It's a requirement, exactly. Okay, after the business requirements, we need the reporting requirements. We need to specify the who, what, where, when, how, and why of each report that we want to have. So we might start with the title or purpose. Is it automatically created or is it an on-demand ad hoc type report? Who's the audience for this report? What's the frequency of the report? What are the data elements and what parameters might the user select when they want to run this report? Is it going to be a graphical report? Are there subtotals and totals on the report? What is the security access for getting to this report? And what is the retention for the report? Now, I know this seems a little bit more that it's getting into the design phase, but we didn't say draw the report. All we're trying to know is what does the business need out of the system?
I
Yes.
think what I've found is that what you will get when you ask for the reporting requirements is a sample of the current report that they use now.
Yes, you do.
And I like that, if you can force them to answer these questions without showing you format, without showing you, that type of stuff, I think it gets to, because you may have a tool that might not be able to print it out like that, but it may give you that information. What you need is the
Right.
information.
Yes, you want to know what information they need to run their business. And wasn't that a great keynote this morning? I feel like he hit on what a business analyst's passion is. He talked about how a lot of people have a need to either create something or to solve problems, and that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to create a system or a solution that will solve a business problem. So we really need to understand what the business's problem is. What is the information that they need out of a report? Maybe they just need to know whether things are in balance. Maybe they need to know how big sales were yesterday, but maybe the real reason they want to know is, did we beat the sales projections? So you need to find out what it is, what is the purpose of the report, what are they needing it for? Okay, after the reporting requirements, let's get into the non-functional requirements, as we mentioned a minute ago. Typically, this is where the BA feels less comfortable filling this stuff out. But all they have to do is ask for help. There might be legal or regulatory requirements. And so the BA should just ask the business what governs their business. It could be credit card protection laws, it could be OSHA, it could be other regulatory agencies. You might need to say the solution will comply with security and privacy rules required by Visa. Next, we might have audit, balancing, and controls and record retention requirements. Ask the business. Ask accounting. Ask audit. Well, don't they want to be included early in the stage of the project and not find out about it a week before it goes in? Then there's security. Again, ask the business. You'll want a requirement up front to say that you want to protect the company's proprietary data, customer data, vendor data, employee data. You'll want some kind of a requirement that says each user must be uniquely defined. They can't share IDs so that it's just a generic ID, if that is the requirement of this system. And maybe you have single sign-on, so that you want the solution to integrate with a single sign-on, so they don't have to have a different ID and password for your particular tool. And then you want to create a matrix spelling out the roles in your application. Maybe we have a requester and an approver and that sort of thing. The roles in the application, the functions that are performed by that role, and whether the role can just browse, add, change, delete, approve. It's the CRUD matrix: create, read, update, delete. You want to have a security requirement about separation of duties. If you're not sure about that, ask accounting, ask audit, ask the business. What do we need to do to protect the business to make sure that a person can't, cut checks to themselves? And then you'd want to have a requirement. You want to specify who approves users requesting access to this particular application. Ask the business if somebody wants access to this particular application, who's going to decide whether they get access, and then who's going to actually grant that access. That's often a separation of duties in larger companies. So we covered security. Next, there's usability, installation, and hosting. Is our solution going to be web-based? Is it going to be public-facing? Is there a thick client with installed software on the desktop? Now, this is starting to get a little bit into the how, but if it's something you already know, or if the business has an expectation or a business need in this area, then you need to state it. Next, there's performance and capacity. Ask the business, and they'll look at you with a blank stare. What do you mean? Well, the way I approach this with a business partner is to ask them, you've heard about how on the day after Thanksgiving, these particular websites might have this super great deal, and so many customers signed on that it crashed the website. That's what we don't want to happen. So we want to know about what is your average number of concurrent users. What do you expect your peak number of concurrent users to be? And what do you expect out of response time? Do you expect split-second answers? Do you expect, are you willing to sit there for 10 seconds and wait for an answer? Are you willing to sit there for a minute to wait for the report to run? And remind the business that it costs money. The faster you want it, the more it's going to cost. What is your slowest expectable response time after which you would expect it to time out? I mean, you don't want to sit there and think, I think I crashed the system. It's just still churning, and it's really has crashed, or it really is about to finish. So at some point you would want it to stop and say, timed out, can't finish. Then there's the interfaces. This is the interface between our solution and other systems. For each one, we need to talk about the data that's going to be sent to that system, the data received from that system, and the urgency or frequency of update. Now, I'm not talking about data elements, list them all out. This is from a business perspective. We need to send orders. We need to get inventory from that system. We need to get on hand. We need to get a description of the merchandise, that sort of thing. Okay, after those requirements, we need to specify support. How many times have we put a system in that said, oh, I thought you were going to write the user guide, or I thought you were going to be the one they call first when they have a question? We need to define who the first level support is. This is typically a help desk. But we need to define who's going to write their documentation. They don't know anything about this solution. Somebody's got to train the help desk. We need second tier support. This is typically going to be the business to answer user questions and that the help desk can't answer. And then your third tier support typically might be your development team or your whoever's responsible for bugs in the system. You need service level agreements. How fast do they expect them to get back with you? If the business expects the systems development folks or the system support folks to be on call 24/7, then we need to specify that here. So that when we're costing out the solution or designing the solution, we can build this into it, that it's going to notify somebody in the middle of the night if something's wrong. Maintenance windows. Find out when the business will not be using the system. Are they only using it Monday through Friday during business hours? Find out if there's a particular time that they expect to need it or not need it. Code upgrades. Is the business expected to participate in code upgrades? Are we going to need them to test the application? We need to find out about seasonal or annual events, like a GL month-end close. Ask the business what happens on a seasonal basis or on an annual basis. What extra support might be needed during that time. And then the disaster. Is there a workaround in a disaster? Can we continue to do it the old way or do it manually if there's a disaster? What outage can the business tolerate during a disaster and at what cost? They'll ask for, I want it to come back immediately until you explain, well, that is going to be quite expensive. And you don't have to give them an exact number. As soon as you say it's going to up the cost, then they might back down. Next, the requirements should address the transition requirements. This is often overlooked until you get near the end of the process. There's the change management, the people side. Someone has to handle this so that you can't just throw it at the users and say, here's your new system, and have people freaking out. Is it taking away my job? You need to address the user documentation and the training. Who will compose it? Who and how will it be delivered? Don't just assume this. The training and people may assume that the business is going to create it. The business people may be assuming that the training people are going to create it. They may assume that, we're going to get a CBT out of this, not knowing how expensive they can be to develop, or assuming that somebody's going to go out and travel to all the sites and train people, not realizing that we don't have the resources for that. The deployment, when is it going to be? Who is involved? Is there overnight testing required at the deployment? We need to state all this up front. Data migration, conversion, archival. What is needed from history? Do we have to convert history into the system? And if we're converting history, is it going to be at the transaction level, at the totals level? How much do we need to keep? And don't forget to address the disposition of the former solution. Are we going to take the old system down immediately? Does the business expect to be able to get to the old solution to look up stuff? Maybe we keep it for a while in lieu of migrating history. So these are all important questions, and that go beyond just your basic business requirements. And they can affect the architecture of the solution, they can affect the time frame, and they can affect the cost. But what can and then we might add a glossary and some approval. We definitely need some approvals at the end of our requirements. But what does all this have to do? Whoops, somehow I backed it up. What can you as the PM do about that? How can you help? Well, first of all, let the BA facilitate the requirements gathering and let the business answer. Listen. Avoid solutioning. A lot of project managers who've come up from a development role are thinking solution and want to say, oh yeah, we could do it this way and we could do it that way. And this just the business analyst is trying to get at the core requirement of the what, not the how. So we don't want to be distracted by solutioning. Most important, do not make yourself the go-between. The project manager should not be the go-between between the business and the business analyst. It's like the old telephone game where one person whispers in the next person's ear and they whisper in the next person's ear and you go all the way around the circle. When you get to the end, do you have the same message you started with? Probably not. The business analyst should not be an order taker just writing down what someone said. They need to think about it all. Like we said before, read the requirements. Verify, do they cover all of these topics that we just went through? Explain to the team how missing any of these can drive up the cost and create delays through misunderstandings. And even if everybody knows it, write it down. If you're in a small shop that doesn't have a formal disaster recovery program, then write down, that there is no disaster recovery, if a true major disaster happened, that things would have to be done manually for a period of time. Do not put down on any of those categories not applicable. If you put not applicable, that means that the author of the requirements decided it was not applicable. And then someone later may say, oh yes, it was. Instead, write, the business has no specific requirements for this category. Because if they approve that statement, they're acknowledging that they haven't withheld anything. Okay, we've talked about requirements. What about process flows? Process flows can be a business analyst's best resource for uncovering the details they might have missed. There are the standard flow charts, which only show the process itself. You have a starting point, you have boxes that represent the steps in the flow, and you have diamonds that represent decision points. They go through what all the process is, but not with regard to who's doing it. And then there are cross-functional flow charts. These show the process across different teams. There is a swim lane for each team. So what processes do we need to document? The first thing that we need to document is the current or as-is process. We want to walk through it with the business team and the technical team to make sure it's right. And notice I said the technical team too, because sometimes the business doesn't know what all's happening. And the technical team who's been supporting the current process knows it a lot better. But we want to include any manual steps. The technical team doesn't know what the business is doing that's manual. So we want to get the whole picture of the particular process. This helps the BA's knowledge to understand the current process, but it also helps the BA's credibility with the business, to know that the business understands, that the BA understands. The business knows the BA really wants to understand. Then document the future or to-be process. Walk through it with the business to agree on what changes, what stays the same, and what goes away. Try to streamline the processes. This is the process improvement. If your cross-functional flow chart showed it jumping back and forth between departments several times, is there a way to streamline that, keep it in one department? But don't be afraid to ask questions or to challenge the non-value add steps. Now it helps if the BA can draw flow charts in real time. It helps facilitate the session, but don't let it slow down the exchange of information. Okay, when the flow charts are done, where do they go? Process flows go in the requirements document after the business requirements. In terms of sequence, the BA should draft the high-level requirements, then draw the process flows, as is and to be's, and then fill in the detail requirements, because you learn so much from those process flows. But what can you as a PM do about this? First, learn to read and create process flows. Second, coach the BA if the process flows are too detailed, too busy, or too hard to follow. And help facilitate the review sessions. Okay, so we've talked about process flows, but what about use cases or user stories? Use cases are typically used in waterfall methodology. User stories are used in an iterative methodology, but they are much the same. They can provide context and perspective. They help the reader who is not a part of the business to understand where these requirements are coming from. Why do they need that report? User stories are typically phrased as a some role, as a manager, as a customer. I want to take some action, place an order, whatever, so that I can order merchandise. Both user stories and use cases can include extensive details to get to the definition of done. The name or description might be what we just referred to as a some role. I want to take some action so that I can get some benefit. We can name the actors and other stakeholders, the preconditions, the triggers. Maybe the trigger might be selecting something, pressing a button. It might be an event happens, or it might be another user story happens. The frequency, how often does this user story happen? Post conditions, after it's done, where are we? An illustration. Now this illustration might be UML. UML is used a lot with user story, with use cases, but I typically use process flows because by the time you've gotten the business to understand how to read a process flow, they want to stick with that. And it's just a different methodology to use UML. Step-by-step instructions for the normal flow, the alternative flow, and the exception flow. Normal flow might be submit a credit card for approval and it gets approved. The exception flow the alternative flow might be it gets declined or we're offline. The exception flow might be, the register just froze up and it's completely shut down. So we might have a rule that says if we can't complete the authorization, we must send a reversal back to the authorizer so that we don't fill up that person's credit open to buy. And then any notes and issues. As you create the use cases or user stories, you will uncover missed requirements. Use cases and user stories are not always helpful. They're beneficial when the process involves people, but they're not beneficial when the processes are systematic only. As you saw, they can be very time-consuming, creating all of those things. But they are often required if you're using offshore development. A lot of the offshore developers require use cases, and it's for the context. If you think about it, we have a lot of assumptions based on our culture and our paradigms. And when someone in a different culture with different paradigms is trying to code what you created, they need to understand all of these pieces and parts. They need to understand the context. So what could you as a PM do about that? Recognize the time investment required and plan for it. Again, read and review the use cases and the user stories. And explain to the team how they can avoid cost overruns and delays created by misunderstandings. Okay, we have the requirements, we have the process flows, and the use cases or user stories. Now are we done? Yes. We have good requirements document which covers all of the key categories. But what if it's taking too long? What if we descended into paralysis of analysis? What can you as the PM do about that? Maybe the BA is overwhelmed. You can suggest to him or her that she use sticky notes to sort her thoughts and sort the requirements. What if the BA is just too passive, just writing down what the business said and not really digging in to find out what they're not saying? You can be a mentor to him or her or request someone. What if the BA is trying to make it too perfect? Commit that you as a project manager will be open to change requests that can arise from imperfection. The BA is more likely to want it to be perfect if everyone fears that change requests are going to be a ding on your performance appraisal. We need to accept that we're not perfect. We need to allow that changes are going to come. Is the BA saying that you didn't allow enough time for the requirements phase? Then you can add more time, or you can break it into phases, break the project into phases so that we can get part of it moving. I hope you've learned enough about the requirements today to better manage that process of the systems development life cycle. What questions do you have?
Have you ever gotten challenged on the time it takes to do this kind of work and this kind of detail for the requirements? Because I find it's always a time crunch when it comes to requirements, and you're sacrificing the quality of the requirement against timeline, money, resources, etc.
I'm just going to repeat the question because we're recording, and you asked if I've gotten challenged on the time it takes. Yes, I think we all do. And I think usually if the BA dives in and gets into the process flows, people start to appreciate the information that's coming out. And realize that it does take that amount of time. There are a lot of statistics out there about how much time the requirements phase should take out of the entire project, and of course that assumes a waterfall methodology. And so you can certainly point to those statistics. I've been personally have been accused of trying to make it too perfect, because I do try to put a lot of detail in there and to get all the details down. But I mean, to me, it's those process flows that tell me whether I've gotten all the detail or whether I haven't. There have been times when I, as a BA, have worked a lot of overtime because the time was too short. We had a deadline handed to us, and we're trying to work to that deadline, rather than just doing it the right way and saying this is when we can deliver it. So it's kind of a trade-off, but I think the important thing is just not to go work at your desk. The important thing is to keep everyone aware of the process as we're going through that, so they can appreciate what's going into it and how far along we are, and they can see what do we still have to get done. What else? Yes.
Yeah. So from your experiences, what are, I guess, the top 2 or 3 things that PMs do to get in your way, or alternatively what they do to help support you the best?
Oh, the top ways PMs get in my way or help me. I think the biggest way that PMs get in my way is trying to be the go-between. Going off, the PM and a sponsor might have meetings that I'm not invited to. Second would be handing me a date that the project has to be finished by, and that happens to all of us. Usually it's handed to the PM, and it's not reasonable. I'm not sure of another way. Let me think. Go on. The way the PMs help me is the best way a PM can help is removing obstacles. If a lot of times there's politics, a lot of times there's someone that's not cooperating or someone who's not attending the meetings that needs to be there, And if the PM can resolve that, can go speak to that sponsor or speak to that business lead about, and educate them on the process and why their involvement is important, that can be a tremendous help. And just allocating enough time to do it and do it right, and supporting me. I mean, I as a BA depend a lot on the PM, because the things the PM's doing are not necessarily things I want to do. I don't want to do schedules. I don't want to do budgets. And so I'm glad to have a PM there. I like to focus on the core business solution. And so I want the PM to let me do that. And, you know, and it's also important to not to throw each other under the bus in front of the rest of the crowd. If there's something I'm doing that's wrong, talk to me about it later. Yes.
At what point in the process of capturing requirements and doing really coming up with your, you know, the assumptions, business requirements, et cetera, your list, at what point do you do the use cases? I've seen them ask for up front. I mean, do the use cases drive the requirements? Do the requirements then lead to the use cases? I get confused on what should be done first.
It's a good question. He asked when the use cases get done, and I've seen them done at different times. I think the thing you don't want to do is save them until after the requirements have been approved. Unless what was approved was the high level requirements and you have intentions to come back and create detailed requirements. Because inevitably more requirements come out of it. Don't think you want to do the use cases before the process flows, because the process flows kind of gives you the big picture of what all the use cases might be. And you know, it would be easy to make a use case too big, and the process flow lets you break it down into parts to understand that maybe completing the transaction is more than just, you know, checkout is more than just one step, one use case. Checkout, you know, it has how am I going to pay for it, where do I want it shipped, all of that stuff. So the process flow lets you figure out what all of those different use cases are that make up the checkout process. And I'm just using checkout, of course, as an example, because we all shopped online and can hopefully and can identify with that. Does that help?
Yeah, I think my experience has been that there seem to be a lot of overlap between the business requirements and the use cases. It's like, you know, I gave you the requirements. Why are you now documenting it in a different way? Right? I told you I want to do this in the requirement. Now you're making me write it in this as the clerk. I want to do X, Y, Z. I mean,
Right.
I told you that.
And a lot of that, to me, the use cases go beyond the requirements because they're getting to the definition of done. What is the acceptance criteria of this particular requirement? And sometimes I've found when the business is not wanting to give me the time or they're overwhelmed with the process, I've found it easier to make it up myself and then let them shoot it down.
Yeah.
And explain to them, I made an assumption here. I want you to tell some assumptions, and I want you to tell me where I'm wrong. I do that with prioritizations as well. We like to prioritize our requirements, and if you ask the business, they're going to make everything a top priority. And so I'll go through and put my initial stab at requirements. You know, this is a must-have, a nice-to-have, this is important, or whatever, and then let them shoot that down. And it helps because, I mean, it's like the old, it's easier to get forgiveness than permission. Yes.
One of the things that attracted me to this session was your title. How do you know your requirements are finished? I found that they're almost never finished. It's a problem is too much regression, but it's constantly spiraling forward. And I just wondered if you talk about that a little bit. How do you know when your requirements
Okay, yeah, I mean, in terms of knowing when your requirements are finished, it gets down to the heart of waterfall versus agile. You know, I started in the business back when developers were talking to the business and just coding based on what they said. I mean, it's what I called by the seat of your pants methodology. And then, you know, waterfall was to put some structure on that. But the problem with waterfall is it assumes that we know everything up front.
Yeah.
And we never know everything up front. And that's why we shouldn't punish for change request. I think, you know, you can use these tools, the process flows, the use cases, to try and identify everything up front. And then there are going to be things that come up.
But how would you answer the question, you go to see your sponsor, he's sort of like the aide-de-camp to the CEO, and the first question he says is, are all the requirements complete? And he asks you directly, is your response as much as we know?
Yes, my response to the CEO would be, yes, the requirements are complete to the extent that we know now, and the business has approved that they are correct.
So shared accountability, essentially.
Yes, shared accountability. I mean, you know, if the business fails to tell us something, maybe that's their fault. If we forgot to ask about it, maybe it's our fault. You know, all you can do is do the best that you can. We're all human. And to me, a requirements document, the only reason why it even exists is for communication, so that we all get on the same page. And so, you know, if we have some place where we're not on the same page, we'll deal with it when we get there. Hopefully it's something that can be a phase 2 enhancement, if it's a major piece. Otherwise, we may have to stop and go back. But if you include this much level of detail, I don't think you'll get, and you're intensely involved. If the BA is intensely involved in trying to understand it from beginning to end, then I don't think I would get punished for missing something. Now, if I'm sitting back and just waiting for the business to tell me, then I might get punished for not doing a better job.
What do you find your changes to be, well, mainly focused in on? Is it things that were missed? Is it details, or is it kind of scope creep?
All of the above. It could be things that were missed, and that's why I said ask about annual and seasonal events, month-end events. Those people tend to forget about those things because they're thinking about the day-to-day. It could be scope creep, and it could just be the tiny little details, and that's why I said ask about the alternative scenarios and the failure scenarios. You know, if the business, when they give us requirements, they like to walk down the happy path. We submit the authorization and then it's approved. And they're not going to necessarily mention the non-happy path unless you ask about it. But yeah, the misses can be all over the place. For a lot of people, it's the accounting. If you don't, it's the missed stakeholder, the balancing that's required. I'm a strong believer in saying, okay, if we're pushing transactions through, then what's at the end should balance back with what's at the end. It was at the beginning, you know, and let's make sure that happened. Let's make sure we didn't lose any transactions. That gives them the business, the warm fuzzy feeling that yes, you know, we didn't have garbage out when we had good stuff coming in. So let's include that in our requirements to create a verification step.
What do you do if you've gone through all of the requirements, hit all the areas of the requirements, and you're done with them? You've had good participation, but there's hesitancy on the approvers when you come to ask them to sign
Okay, so I've had good participation and we think we're done, but their hesitancy to sign off. A lot of that, a lot of business partners don't want to sign off because they're afraid that they're backing themselves in a corner and they won't be able to get something else when they forgot about. And what you do a lot depends on the culture of the company, because I've worked a lot of different places. In some places, they're like, we will not move forward to the next stage until we get the sign-offs. And other places, it's like, no, we're not that formal, we need, just go ahead and get started and start coding. So, it becomes an assumption of sorts that the business has told us everything that they need. And so if my project manager or my PMO director or CIO was telling me we need to move forward without the sign off, then I would probably try to CYA with an email saying that we understand that there's the potential that this particular business partner might come back and say, well, I never approved that. It's happening to us now. Yes.
Isn't it true that your comment about helping the PM helping the VA know that the change control process can handle a mistake is also true? Not a mistake.
A miss.
A missed piece of information could help with the business partner as well.
That's very
Change
true.
control
Yeah.
process that depending on, how late the information is discovered, it could add significant cost or time, but there is a process in place to, there's something on this. That's helped some of our sign when they didn't sign before.
Right. Yes. If we explain to the business the change control process, and I'm just repeating it for the recording, then like we were, like the PM, then that can help with giving them the comfort to go ahead and sign. They need to understand that anything that could affect the date, and it could affect the cost, and the further down in the process, the more it's going to cost, and the more it's going to affect the date, could even dramatically affect the architecture. So that kind of will encourage them to participate more fully up front and try to not forget anything. Anything else? Yes.
You mentioned audit requirements. One of the things I've run into is one of the auditors saying, hey, what do we need to audit for? And the auditor says, I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to audit for because I don't want to be defining your process. So have you ever run into that sort of thing? And I've had that from multiple auditors saying, look, it's not ethical for me to tell you exactly what I'm testing for. I'm not going to define your process for you. I'm going to tell you based on your control points whether you're meeting the objectives you describe at the beginning. So what do you do in that situation? Because when I entered that for the first time, I'm not an auditor, so I don't even know what an auditor's looking for.
I think if an auditor told me that he wasn't going to tell me what he was looking for, I would probably rely on the business and the accounting team to guide me. If the process is governed by Sarbanes-Oxley, then they can tell me, yes, we need to prove that everything we put in the system came out the other side. They should know their business well enough to tell us what kind of controls are needed. I look at it from the perspective of, okay, I'm going to be comfortable that the system is working right. How do I prove that it's working right? How would I show someone else that it's working right? Well, maybe we need a balancing report that shows that what we started with and what we got at the end are in balance. So that, if the auditor were to come knocking on my door and say, prove to me that this system is not losing stuff or not garbling stuff or whatever, how would I prove it to them? And then I kind of turn that into requirements. Does that help?
Yeah, I think my experience has been that a lot of times business people don't really understand their business process very well. And the process of doing swim lanes and process flows they're like, oh, I just hand it off to Sally and she does something, and Sally says, oh, Sanjeet takes care of that, you know, and then you kind of spiral out till you identify what actually happens, and you go, wow, I had no idea it was that hard.
Right. That's the best thing about process flows, that people will realize how hard it actually is or how extensive it is, and will look to try and streamline it. Yeah, and your process flows can give you some ideas as well as to where controls are needed. And I think if typically when the auditor is telling you, I'm not going to tell you what you're looking for, it really means he doesn't know what he's going to look for until he sees it. I've always kind of tried to be the auditor's best friend. You know, I'll help them to know what to look for, because, you know, it's a better relationship when there's a mutual trust there. I don't know where we are on time. When are we supposed to finish?
10 till.
15 minutes.
Oh, we have 15 minutes. Wow. I'm sorry. Yes.
One of the points on your list that I'd like to hear your perspective on is the glossary. So what goes into the glossary, and how do you solicit input for that, and how do you advocate that people read the glossary?
Typically, I've found people do not really read the glossary. The BA's job typically is to be a liaison between the business and the developers. And so a lot of that has to do with the language of the two. So if there are terms used in the business, if there's industry terms or company terms or acronyms that the business is using, I'll spell them out even in the glossary, even if everybody knows what they mean, because the developer might not want to admit that he doesn't know what that is, and it helps his understanding to know what it is. If there's text speak that gets used somewhere in there, you know, then I'll spell that out. So it really, sometimes the glossary can end up being very short. Just depends on what I don't think there's any set rules around the glossary.
I think about even in terms like requirement. People use that word a lot. I'm not sure that people know what that necessarily means in business. So anything I think I might like to have is a requirement. You know, we'll launch a
Wish list.
requirements. Like that's required is required, right? So
Right.
That's one of those things from a glossary perspective. I think about how do we help people get on the same page. It's not something you fantasize about. It's something that I can't deliver without.
And a lot of that gets into the priority of the requirements. One of the things that I didn't address is the use of the word will and shall. I always word a requirement, you know, with the word will. And there have been places I've worked where they forced us to use the word shall, and they mean the same thing. If somebody says, oh, it would be really nice to have this, I don't put the business would like to have this. I'll put, you know, it will do this, and then give it a lower priority, because it's got to be testable, and it either does it or it doesn't do it, and you can't call it testable with it says it'd be nice to have. So when you turn it into the word will, you know, it will do this or it shall do this, they're like, oh, well, you know, it'd be nice to have. Yes, it has a lower priority. We'll do it if there's time. Oh, okay.
How about when you have the output is going to be used for a vendor analysis, and the vendor isn't going to provide all the requirements, or you have several different technologies that you're going to build into an ecosystem, and this is going to be inputs to the RFP creation process. How do you finesse that, or in your experience, how do you handle it?
Yeah, when the requirements are going to be input to the RFP process, that can be, that's when it's even more important to word the what and not the how, and to get to the core process, what the process needs to be. A lot of businesses will make the mistake of trying to take what is not their core business and make it their custom way of doing it. If I'm Lowe's and my core business is home improvement store sales, then HR and accounting is not my core business. So if I need to get a new accounting system, then how important is that particular requirement? Is it part of our core? Is it a requirement that supports our core business, or is it just because I've always done it that way? I think in that particular case, when you're going to do an RFP, it's important to, if it's a new area or an area where the old solution was homegrown and everybody's kind of set in their ways, I think it's important to do an RFI process first and have, see what's out there. See the vendor dog and pony shows with the understanding that they're maybe showing you vaporware or whatever.
A future opportunity.
Yeah, future opportunity. To learn the possibilities, but you don't want to ever create your requirements to match the vendor software. The requirements need to kind of be done before you go through the RFP process to say, what do we really need? And then the requirements always need to be an attachment to or integral in the RFP and in the contract to say that the vendor is going to deliver what's in these requirements. After you've selected the vendor.
Do you ever prioritize the requirements in a way that sort of the most essential requirements?
Oh, yes.
You did it earlier, you gave us the framework, must have and nice to have.
Yes,
or
yes.
not, or whatever.
Yes, and I always, when you're prioritizing the requirements as a must-have, or it's important, or it's nice to have, or you can use numbers 1, 2, 3, or whatever you want to use. If the business calls everything a must-have, my challenge back to them is, okay, so we're going to shut the project down if we can't do this, have this requirement, or if the vendor simply can't provide this particular solution, we're going to reject that vendor altogether. Is that what you're saying? And then they'll usually back down, or they'll say, yes, this really is that critical. So it's very helpful to kind of challenge them in that regard. But don't share those rankings with the vendors in the RFP.
Oh, yeah.
It's nice to have, I like when I send out an RFP to vendors, I like to have some requirements in there that they're not going to meet, so that they're not like, yes, 100%. I think it's important that they answer that yes is in their base product, or it's in an upcoming release, or yes, they don't do it now, but they can customize for it, or to say it's a parameter set selection. It's important to know whether it's a parameter selection or it's custom coding, and how they would maintain the code going forward if they customize it for you in that way.
So you can sort your requirements by priority, and you can sort their response by priority.
Exactly.
That's good thinking.
Yes. We want to sort their responses by priority as well. Because if somebody meets all of our importance, but they don't meet our critical, then is it really critical? Or, it helps to weigh the vendor's answers, and you can put numbers against that to actually have a scorecard.
That's very useful, thank you.
I was looking out on the IIBA website and looking for some different things that I might have missed in the presentation. And there's a lot more information out there that BAs can learn from than just what I've covered today. What I was trying to do is help you, since this is PMI, to help you as a project manager just to kind of begin to understand the BA world. So please don't think that I've covered everything. There can be a lot more to it, but I'm just trying to get at the essentials. I apologize that we're early. I don't want to cheat you.
I'll keep you going here.
Okay.
What about, we all are familiar with Visio, but what software aside from Visio do you recommend for process modeling? You know, PowerPoint has that really crappy tool in it, but especially for swim lane diagrams, it's so darn complicated sometimes to draw those. What do you recommend besides Visio as a tool?
I'm sorry, I absolutely love Visio. So I don't try to use anything but Visio. I just adore Visio. It's fun.
But if you're on a Mac, you can't use Visio.
Oh, okay.
I mean, there is no comparable. That's why I'm wondering what the.
Paper and pen.
Or even in SaaS, there's all these new SaaS solutions. I just wondered if you could look for those.
Well, let's see if anybody else in the room knows of other solutions, because I'm not familiar with other process drawing tools. I will say that when I do them in Visio, I always print to a PDF and send that out, because the person, the business partners and teams that are reading it don't have the Visio software and don't want to know how to use Visio. So I will just put it to a PDF where they can write on it, or they might have the PDF software that lets you add notes or whatever. And when I put the process flow in the requirements document itself, I will save it as a PDF and then insert that PDF, insert a file and insert PDF, because you don't ever want to copy, I mean, this is technical, but you don't ever want to just select all, copy, and then paste, because sometimes the Visio stuff will get moved around. Plus, it becomes a JPEG, or it becomes a bitmap, which is a huge resource hog. It makes your Word file much, much bigger if you're using Word. And I also like to use section breaks so that I can make the normal pages 8.5 by 11 and make that page 11 by 17, so that you can fold out, and they're not having to use triple strength bifocals to read it.
Did anybody make a suggestion aside from Visio?
I do.
There's a tool called Shapes.
Shapes?
Yeah, I mean, Visio rocks. I drank the Kool-Aid too on Visio. I hate Microsoft, but I mean, Visio is a reason to have Windows.
Wasn't there too.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't originally Visio wasn't originally a Microsoft tool. I think they bought it.
Well, yeah, I started playing around with Shapes. OmniGraffle is another one on Mac. OmniGraffle, yeah.
Shapes,
Is that
OmniGraffle.
SAS or is it a?
No, those are both fat clients for Mac.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, so they're for a Mac.
Mac
Okay.
specific, yeah.
I mean, just like, recently Tableau, for data visualization, it's an online tool, it's got a huge amount of power behind it. It's cheap, you do a monthly, it's cheap. I just wondered if there was anything. Does Google Docs have a process mapping? Not that I want to use it or anything, but I just wondered.
Not that I know of. Is anybody aware of
All right.
Google Docs having anything?
Yeah, I know that
Okay.
for you.
Yes.
Sometimes one project has got like many different work streams, probably should be broken out into like a program, but sometimes the sponsor or whoever's kind of championing it says, no, I want one project and I want multiple work streams. And there's all these different BRDs or requirement documents that need to be done. How do you integrate all of that together? Because sometimes I find that the work streams are totally independent, but it's just the political behind it that, hey, I've got to have, it's all one project.
Okay. In terms of, just to repeat your question, it's multiple work streams in one project, and I've kind of had that recently. I try to break them into like phase 1A, phase 1B to make them separate. And I think the place to bring them back together could be in the process flows. The process flow, I think it's important in process flows to use the little box that's like called a sub-process, which represents something on another page, so that you have a high-level process that's made up of a bunch of sub-processes. And I think with your different streams, you can bring them back together in that process flow to understand the big picture and how this stream fits in with this stream.
So you try to do it visually with a process flow. to kind
Yeah,
of
and I guess that's because I'm a visual thinker.
Yeah, I am too, actually,
Yeah. And I think that helps you figure out whether something else is missing. Because if we're looking at multiple streams and we want to figure out where it fits in the process flows, then there might be other streams that we're not touching, but we need to either find their as-is flows or create their as-is flows so that we can get the whole big picture. And you know, if you're a large enough shop that has a team that's maintaining the overall arching architecture, then they may have some of that. We're out of time? Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.